So this is gonna be one of the coolest Batman stories that DC's ever done. I can't wait till you guys get to the end because it's gonna be crazy. But what this does is this follows hot off the heels of the whole failsafe story, right? So basically the robot that Batman built in order to destroy Batman and presumably the rest of the Justice League, if for whatever reason Batman killed someone, was out of control and the Justice League tried to stop the failsafe robot. So at the end of that story, failsafe had basically shot Batman, but much like we saw in Grant Morrison's Final Crisis, instead of Batman dying because he's too popular to kill off, they basically sent him to an alternate reality. And this reality is amazing. So as soon as he gets here, one of the first things that happens is he starts hallucinating basically Jim Gordon, who kind of looks like Mr. Bones in DC. Honestly, he's not really important here. What is important is that things jump to an apartment complex in this version of Gotham where you have a guy who looks like a Titan from Resident Evil 2, because I'm playing through that game right now, and basically he smashes down a door and keeps talking about judgment. Now, when he walks in here, what he does is he asks the people in this place, I have one question, are you sane or are you insane? Because those are the only two forms of judgment that Gotham recognizes, the only two things. There is a third one, which is death for anybody out there that challenges my judgment, but this guy kind of moves around without any real oversight whatsoever, at least that seems to be the case. He's kind of the judge, jury, and executioner. Now, Bruce Wayne making his way through here and realizing somebody's calling for help because they just happen to be near the rooftop that he was at, he immediately jumps in and starts fighting this guy. But what he starts to realize is that, one, this is Harvey Dent in this universe. In the main DC universe, he's normally Two-Face. He got his origin story in the Long Halloween. In this universe, he's not. He's just Harvey Dent, who went from somehow being a district attorney to becoming like this almost villainous character called the Judge. The other part of this is that Harvey Dent is all hopped up on the Venom formula, right? For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that, the Venom serum is what Bane takes in order to amplify himself up and make himself bigger, stronger, and more durable. Apparently, Bane doesn't exist in this universe, but instead what you have is Harvey Dent, who's walking around with the serum and to a degree playing the same role, right? Chip Zdarsky is very much basing this version of Harvey Dent off of Bane from Tom King's Batman run. They're very similar in that way. But of course, Bruce Wayne, being aware of how to defeat Bane despite his size, is able to get the upper hand on Harvey Dent. And then in turn, like, Firefly shows up, who's always a moron, right? It's literally in the story, Bruce Wayne's like, Firefly's an idiot no matter what universe he's in, because he opens fire in a wood apartment complex, literally with a flamethrower. It's the dumbest possible thing that you could do, right? It's walking into a mine full of methane gas and lighting a lighter in order to see, right? You're gonna blow yourself and the mine to smithereens, right? That's literally what's gonna happen. So Bruce Wayne's able to save the innocents here, but in the middle of this fight, he's suddenly rescued by this girl who just kind of jumps in and whisks him away. Now, while this happens, what we do is we jump over to this reality's version of Catwoman. Now, the reason why Chip Zdarsky is likely using her as opposed to anybody else is because Catwoman, despite the fact that her and Bruce Wayne aren't technically married or really even in a relationship, there's still a lot of love there from the work that was done during Tom King's run when they were close to being married. So showing us this alternate reality version is really fascinating because what she's doing is she's dealing with a henchman who had basically been skimming off the top with the money that he was supposed to be bringing to her. Now, the funny thing here, she doesn't really care that he's been skimming. She cares that he's been bragging, which makes her look weak. But in the middle of the whole thing, when she's probably going to kill this guy, she gets a call from a guy by the name of the Red Mask. Do not let this guy's initial indication, walking through Arkham, people in chairs, all that kind of stuff, do not let that put you off to whether or not this guy is relevant. He is one of the coolest villains that DC's introduced. He's phenomenal, and I guarantee you're gonna love this guy. Now, once Bruce Wayne wakes up and really kind of starts spilling the beans on what seems to be going on, he starts talking about the idea that he's hallucinating, he's seeing things that aren't necessarily there, specifically in relation to Jimbo, that he feels fuzzy, and a lot of it just appears to be due to multiversal travel, right? The fact that he's just kind of been shot from one universe to another. But what Jewel tells him is that it's not actually a result of multiversal travel. There is a substance that's being pumped throughout the city of Gotham in a gaseous form that basically drives people to hallucinate or to commit crimes, different things like that. And so what she says is that whole process is basically being undertaken by a guy named Darwin Halliday. And she says the only people who were not influenced by that gas are the people who live in what's called Athena Tower. But of course, Bruce Wayne, ever the detective, is trying to get to the bottom of, one, what happened to this universe's version of Bruce Wayne, two, what's going on in this city, and three, since he's stuck here, is it possible for him to fix it? And so what he does is he literally tells Jewel, find a way to get me into Athena Tower. Now, the funny thing about this is Jewel tells him, I can make you look the part. The question to ask here, Bruce Wayne, is can you pretend to be rich? Now, of course, yes, he can. He does it all the time. He's a billionaire in his own universe. It's one of the coolest elements of Bruce. But the important thing here is that giving him the tools he needs, he's able to go in there and just improvise. Now, as he makes his way through this party and he's able to just kind of pretend to be super rich and so on and so forth, he starts asking people questions about Darwin Halliday. Not only that, he's unfamiliar to them. And so when they start asking him questions like, are you not an Athena resident? Do you not live here in Athena Tower? His response is, no, like I'm actually from out of town. I'm new here. I'm basically trying to figure out where it is that I want to be at. Athena Tower seems like the place to be, right? So one part admitting that he's basically new to the area, and then the other part kind of ingratiating himself to a degree or flattering the ultra rich, because if there's anything super rich people like, it's other people telling them how awesome they are. And so what ends up happening is that Selina Kyle ends up embracing him, right? Like encountering him and embracing him. And it's really, really awesome because while she doesn't say it right off the bat, she basically seems to figure out like that it's Bruce Wayne. She seems to figure it out so incredibly fast. And that's one of the cool things is because what he does is that in realizing it's Selina and that she's basically a villain essentially in this universe, he almost kind of sees her as the Selina from his own universe. And that's why he starts saying things like, have you ever wanted something like a fresh start? You ever wanted to like leave and start your life over again or something along those lines? And subtly putting out there this idea that she could leave Gotham City behind and they could run away together and that kind of a thing, right? It's kind of his emotions catching up to him. But what ends up happening is that he ultimately ends up seeing Darwin Halliday for a brief moment up in the rafters. And when he does, he immediately recognizes him as the Joker. And so what he, like literally Batman's like, okay, I need to leave. And that's when Selina Kyle snatches him up with her own whip and says, I know you're Bruce Wayne. And the whole thing was a trap because suddenly all these forces just come descending onto Bruce Wayne. Now, the party itself was legit. It was an actual legit party being put on by the super rich. But as soon as they realized that Bruce Wayne was there, they were literally mobilizing forces outside of the building and bringing them all to this location. Now, Bruce is able to hold his own against them for the most part to a degree. And in fact, he is able to engineer his escape. The problem with this, and what's kind of nuts, is that he sees Alfred Pennyworth. Now, Alfred is in this universe, and Alfred seemingly is the one who inherited the entirety of the Wayne family estate. And so he is ultra rich. But he's also kind of a coward. He's not the Alfred that we're traditionally used to, which is the guy that will do whatever it takes in order to ensure the right thing gets done. And so it's a really, really cool moment because Batman basically jumps out of the entirety of the building. Now, the funny thing about this is that when he makes his jump, there's this kind of crazy moment, right? Like he throws a rope and then like he just kind of uses it to sort of brace his fall, right? He like flies down through like the ceiling of a building and crash lands on the ground. And he's like, I can do this because I fell from the moon and survived. So like Chip Zdarsky's just kind of having fun here, if we're being honest with ourselves. And I love it. Is it over the top and ridiculous? Yes, but it's also amazing at the same time. And so as a result of this, Bruce Wayne comes to this realization that with the world realizing that Bruce Wayne is still very much alive, that it's kind of history repeating itself to a degree. He realizes Gotham City does not have a Batman. And so after beating up basically a cop who is attacking a woman and kind of clubbing her with a stick, and God knows what else he's going to do, basically chasing this cop off, he is momentarily kind of knocked down and then sees basically a bat hanging upside down. And that's when it dawns on him, I need to become this universe's version of Batman. And so when he does that, it is a makeshift Batman thing, right? He has none of the tools and none of the resources at his disposal. It's just kind of him doing his own thing. But what's also nuts here is you transition over to the Riddler. And one of the things that happens here, and one of the things to know, is that Red Mask within this city of Gotham is basically the guy who runs Arkham Asylum. But one of the other things that goes on, and is actually really, really twisted, is in this reality's version of the Riddler, that what he does is he proposes these riddles to little kids. And if they're not able to solve it, they get sent off to Arkham Asylum. It's really messed up. It's twisted. But what's nuts here is that in the middle of all this, suddenly Batman arrives, right? And it's kind of just an amazing moment because he doesn't look like Batman the way he normally does. It's none of the posh or circumstance or anything like that, right? It's just him in what is in effect a makeshift Batman suit, which is pretty basic. Now, one of the cool things is that he's going to get a wholly new suit, and his new suit is going to be influenced by a person that you least suspect. Now, what ends up happening here, of course, with the Riddler being beaten within an inch of his his life, that Selina Kyle also failed to capture Batman. And so basically the Red Mask, seemingly using like super speed, which is kind of nuts, attacks Selina Kyle and then tells her, if you do not find Batman, I will bring you into Arkham Asylum. You will be here, and you will be among all these people in here who are being tortured, full of torment, all that kind of stuff. And so following that, after the defeat of the Riddler, Batman goes to visit the grave of Bruce Wayne in this reality. And the image of the Joker haunts his face, because what he needs to know is he needs to know what's going on. Like, why is the Joker here but not here at the same time? Why is this guy, seemingly Darwin Halliday, walking around looking like the Joker, at least in terms of physical features, but he's not actually the Joker? And so with Batman digging up the grave of Bruce, he starts to realize that there's something bigger going on here. He seems to have been killed, but the question is how? Now, of course, this leads to Alfred Pennyworth stepping up, basically like wondering what in the world Batman's doing here, digging up the grave of Bruce Wayne. But the response of Bruce is like, I'm basically this Bruce, right? But I'm from a different reality. And so what ends up happening is that he basically takes the body of Bruce essentially to a hospital. And with Jewel on the lookout to make sure that nobody's showing up here, what he does is he actually modifies the machine, the MRI, in order to detect any traces of energy that shouldn't be there. And what he finds out is that there are small traces of multiversal energy here, right? This Bruce Wayne seems to be a Bruce from potentially another reality. But before we can even actually get any answer to these questions, you basically have the judge, Harvey Dent, who shows up and then starts like attacking everything, right? Attacking Bruce and so on and so forth. Now, it is a kind of final showdown between the two, but as much as like a final showdown possibly can be, because in no uncertain terms, this guy helps Dent understand his place in the bigger picture. This fight doesn't even last a hot second. He absolutely crushes this guy. So what ends up happening is that once Dent is just beat within an inch of his life, once this guy's absolutely pummeled and Wayne establishes his dominance, he ends up meeting with Selina Kyle. Now, the funny thing about this is that Selina Kyle's loyalties really to like Red Mask are questionable at best. And it's one of those things that we just didn't really know. So she's not really loyal to anybody. Now, one of the things that kind of is really interesting here is Bruce Wayne tries to approach her as the Selina that he knows, which is that person being an inherently good person. This Selina just kind of seems to be too far gone down the dark side, right? Down the dark path. And in fact, she rejects any attempt at him to try to make the case of like, she's a good person, she can do good things. But the whole reason for her being here is she literally says, I can bring you to the Red Mask. I can bring you to this guy who runs the entirety of like Gotham City. I can bring you to Arkham and tell you what it is that you want to know. Now, Batman is no fool. And he looks at this and says, okay, so like this girl is willing to lead me into the lion's den. And basically everything that she's ever indicated to me is that she is a straight up villain. And as he's making his way through Arkham, one of the things he sees is like Lex Luthor, for example, is locked up in Arkham Asylum. The Flash Barry Allen is locked up in Arkham Asylum. That's why there don't really seem to be any superheroes on this earth. Now, the only reason why we make that case is because the story doesn't really explore anything outside of Gotham. So we don't know what Metropolis looks like. We don't know if Wonder Woman ever left the Amazons. Like, we don't know any of that stuff, right? We're just kind of hypothesizing here based on what we see. But Batman, of course, ends up coming face to face with a Red Mask, who removes his helmet and then reveals he's actually Darwin Halliday, right? Surprise, surprise. I'm sure you guys already figured that out. Here's what you didn't know, and here's what's gonna blow your mind, right? This is gonna absolutely blow your mind. So what this guy does is he tells Batman his story, and he says that he at one point just ran a pharmaceutical empire. Gotham City was a city just like any other, and that's really all it was. But the idea here is that there was just something missing in his life, and he didn't really know what it was. So he started pushing his staff members more and more on these different experiments and all kinds of crazy stuff, until at some point, one of the compounds went nuts, and he hallucinates and sees into the multiverse. And when he does, he sees the person he was supposed to become, which is the Joker. He sees that like in any number of alternate realities, he became the Joker. He didn't become the person that he is now. And so what he's been doing this entire time is trying to tap into his own insanity by understanding the insanity of other people, or at least their perceived insanity, so he can become that insane character. So he can drive himself to be the Joker. Not only that, this is where things get cool. The residents of Arkham Asylum are not just the citizens in Gotham, right? Not just people who were deemed insane by the judge. It's people from alternate realities. It's people from alternate universes, that what he was trying to do is harness their multiversal energy, and in doing so, feed that energy, use that energy, and then become the Joker by traveling into the multiverse. It's nuts, right? It's just this crazy scheme. Now, one of the things that happens, right? One of the cool things that goes on here is that what DC's been doing is ever since the end of Dark Crisis, they've been building the multiverse out. This is a return to DC Comics between like 1963 and the Flash of Two Worlds, technically 1961, and like the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths in the 1980s. During about that 23-year stretch, DC was crafting stories like this, where you would have just crossovers with alternate realities and like characters just be whisked off to alternate universes by whatever manner and whatever means. It's awesome to see DC doing this. And so when he comes to the realization that what he intends to do is take all this kind of multiversal energy, right, in the form of like a gas, pump it out into the city of Gotham, and then feed on all the multiversal energy that will basically be imbued within the citizens of Gotham themselves, that in turn, accessing the multiverse would be the name of the game, that you have Bruce who reaches out to Selina and says this guy's gonna kill the entirety of Gotham in an attempt to basically get into the multiverse and just create some crazy or find some crazy version of himself. Now, along the way, what you end up having is basically Ghostmaker. Ghostmaker was a character that was introduced in James Tynion's run. He and Batman trained together when they were younger. And the overall difference between these two characters is that, of course, Batman doesn't really believe in killing, right? He will put you in a place where physically and mentally your life is worse than death, and you might be better off dead as far as you're concerned, but at least he didn't kill you, right? I mean, that's kind of Batman's thing, right? The Ghostmaker doesn't care about any of that stuff. The Ghostmaker will kill criminals on the spot. This reality version is a little different. He's called the Ghost Breaker. He's pretty ruthless, pretty hardcore. He's like the deadliest assassin that the Red Mask has. He's only ever sent out in the most dire of circumstances. In the fight between Ghostbreaker and Batman, that Batman literally goes to kind of try to make an escape, and Ghostbreaker in that moment throws his sword and cuts off Batman's hand, which is kind of nuts. Not only that, in this reality is a rogue Superman from some alternate universe that showed up here and was immediately overtaken by the Red Mask. And so now he just kind of operates as a henchman of the Red Mask, as kind of a mindless beast. Now, in one of the most Batman-esque moments ever, Chip Zdarsky has this moment where Batman just recites to Clark Kent, "I walk as a man, but I am your nightmare," which seems to like trigger this kind of just reaction to Superman that just sends him freaking out and just flying away. But again, with Batman's hand basically cut off by Ghostmaker, now you got a one-handed Batman who's running around trying to find a way to like stop Ghostmaker before everything can pop off, right? Before everything can go nuts. Now, the other part of this is that Red Mask seemingly has a backup plan for a backup plan, because in the case that Ghostbreaker was killed by this version of Bruce, that what he also had are what are called the Leather Wings. Now, the Leather Wings are basically just this reality's version of Kirk Langstrom, also known as Man-Bat in DC Comics. Now, again, all this is just stopgap measure stuff. That's really all this is. I mean, these are things that Red Mask is sending out there really to attack Gotham more than anything else, in the hopes that it might keep Batman distracted. Fortunately, between Jewel and Alfred Pennyworth, who finally grew some balls, along with Leslie Tompkins, who is still kind of the romantic interest of Alfred, albeit she kind of lost respect for him because he's too much of a coward. Between all of them working together, they are able to get a lot of the citizens of Gotham inside of Athena Tower before they're all subjected to the crazy, substance that's out there. Now, enough people are subjected to it that Red Mask is able to feed off the multiversal energy which powers the machine in order to try to turn himself into the Joker. But when this happens, this is one of the coolest revelations ever. When this happens and he uses the machine, what he realizes is that he cannot become the Joker. Instead, him using the machine and looking into the multiverse is actually him creating the Jokers. He's the reason why the Jokers exist. Now, for the most part, when it comes to how Chip Zdarsky explains this, it's not overly well done. And in fact, it's even still a little bit ambiguous. What it really seems to do, though, is it seems to build on the idea of the Killing Joke, right? This notion that every single time there is an instance where the Joker becomes the Joker, that the Killing Joke seems to be the origin, right? Like one bad day. And it just breaks him on a mental level when he's thrown into the vat of chemicals at Ace Chemical by Batman inadvertently. And so once he comes out and he looks down into the puddle in the Killing Joke, just like he seemingly always does, that basically the Red Mask looks in from the multiverse and sees the Joker becoming the Joker. And it seems to be based off the reflection of Red Mask that the Joker becomes Joker in the first place. So again, we don't necessarily know. Again, it's not overly explained. It's simply just him coming to this realization that he's the one that creates the Jokers. He's the reason why they exist. And so once Batman reemerges onto the scene and kind of an initial fight breaks out between Red Mask and Batman himself, this is where it goes. This is the ending I was telling you about. This is where it goes nuts. When the fight breaks out, once Red Mask realizes he can't beat Batman, he takes off into the multiverse. And what happens is basically a cat and mouse game, that you essentially have Batman who jumps into the multiverse and goes after Red Mask. And as this happens, he's transported to all these different realities. The first reality he's transported to is Batman 89, Michael Keaton's Batman. Now, those of you guys who know from the movie, the Joker, Jack Nicholson's Joker, he died at the end. What ends up happening is the Joker has returned, seemingly because the Red Mask brought him back to life. And so while he does meet with Michael Keaton's Batman for a brief moment before any real conversation can be had, he's literally pulled back into the multiverse again. And at that point, he just kind of starts slingshotting around different universes. He ends up traveling into the Batman the Animated Series universe and basically fights alongside that version of Batman against the Joker, who's basically returned, although I wasn't even aware that version of Joker died in the first place. He ends up being transported to like the Snyderverse, right? What passed for a decent set of DC films, that everywhere Red Mask goes, the Jokers in these universes that are supposed to be dead end up resurfacing. He ends up in the Batman Beyond universe, fighting alongside Terry McGinnis. He sees like this grizzled old version of himself. And in fact, this version of Bruce Wayne actually figured out that this version of Bruce is from a different universe. Not only that the Red Mask is basically traveling throughout the multiverse and bringing Jokers back. Go figure, right? An old grizzled Bruce Wayne would figure out what's going on before the main DC universe Bruce Wayne ever even showed up. But it is cool, and this is kind of like this amazing encounter between the two, because as far as I'm aware, the main DC universe Bruce Wayne has never met his old grizzled self from Batman Beyond. I could be wrong, and feel free to leave a comment if I am, but I'm not aware of this ever happening. So it is just like a really amazing encounter between them. But as most people know from the Batman Beyond universe, that you did have the original Joker, that Joker was killed, that Joker returned in the body of Tim Drake. So seemingly, that version of Joker is back again, right? Tim Drake Joker is back. Following this, it's Batman basically ending up in like the Kingdom Come reality, which is absolutely amazing. And then he ultimately ends up coming across Batman in the Adam West universe. Now, this is the crazy thing here, because when he gets here, in the conflict between the two of them, when the Joker's being dealt with pretty quickly, right, with special effects and word balloons and all that kind of stuff, as you would normally expect with Adam West, that what he actually ends up doing is taking off his utility belt and giving it to Batman as a kind of form of assistance. And so when you have Batman from the main DC universe who jumps to the next universe, which is basically the Dark Knight reality from Frank Miller, right, The Dark Knight Returns, when he ends up in that reality, of course, he comes across that version of Bruce. And as the two of them are talking, that version of Bruce ends up handing him basically a kind of outfit of sorts, or at least a cape and a cowl. And so between these different versions of Batman from across the multiverse, you basically have Bruce Wayne himself putting together a kind of hodgepodge Batman suit. It's a multiversal Batman suit, and it's dope. Like, it's really, really amazing. And so with this being the case, the final place that he ends up finding Red Mask is seemingly at the very end of the multiverse, when you have what is quite possibly one of the most horrifying things in existence, a whole bunch of basically Jokerized Megalodon sharks that are eating reality. It sounds cool, and I'd love to see it in a game or a movie, but it just sounds horrifying at the same time. But of course, ever the guy who's prepared for this, anybody, as soon as you guys saw the Adam West Batman, you had to know this was coming, right? Like, Batman reaches into the utility belt given to him by Adam West and pulls out the one thing that we all know can defeat sharks, right? The shark repellent bat spray, which I absolutely love. Any of you guys who never saw that from the Adam West Batman movie, it was hilarious. Literally, there's a shark on Batman's leg, and he's like, Robin, grab the shark repellent bat spray. So Robin gets out of his seat in the helicopter, grabs the shark repellent bat spray, brings it out, and throws it down to Batman, who sprays the shark, and the shark leaves. And so Following that, basically Batman beats the crap out of Red Mask and he's ultimately defeated, right? Batman kind of saves the day, but not before all these different versions of the Joker from across the multiverse that were supposed to have been destroyed end up coming back to life as a result of the Red Mask, which basically allows DC to return to telling stories about those versions of the Joker without having to answer the question in any complex terms, how in the world they managed to come back. They can just point to this story and that's effectively it. But in the midst of all this, of course, Robin shows up, basically rescues Batman at the edge of the multiverse, brings him back to the main DC universe, and the day's saved. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.